But today we're going to be looking at crab pots. I get a lot of questions on crab pots, on what type of crab pot, what ropes, how to set it up, what bobbers, all this sort of thing. So we're going to be looking at today. This is, like I say, more for small boat fishing, and it's how I do things. Everybody, like I say, will do things in their own way and use different pots and all that. So but this is what I use. So anyway, we'll start with the ropes. This is just a cheap nylon-y, plasticky rope, synthetic rope, polyfinous it says on there. I don't know if that's English or if that's Portuguese, because I think this is from Portugal originally, these ropes. But anyway, you get yourself a rope like that. Now, on a small boat, I would use 10mm rope. I do use 8 sometimes, but 8 you want to really change it each year, and it is a little thin 8, although you can get away with it if you're on a very tight budget. The bigger boats or truces and that will go up to 12, and they'll go up even more if they're commercial kind of things. So yeah, like I say, personally I use a 10mm. That's a nice balance. Obviously if you use a thicker rope and you have tide, you're going to get more drag on the rope, and if you get more drag on the rope, it's going to pull on your pots. It's also going to pull your bobbers down, so you're going to need bigger bobbers, and if you've got bigger bobbers, even more drag on your pots. So you have to think of these things. The reason I have the 8 is if I go very, very deep, and I want to take some pots out real deep, I'll put an 8mm on, and it will cut the tide, keeping my bobbers up and not dragging on my pots so much. But I don't do it that often. Like I say, most of my pots are on 10mm. Now, when you buy crab pot rope, you need a rope that sinks. Now there's 2 ways of doing that. You either buy a leaded rope, which is very expensive, and here it's extremely expensive, and it's probably extremely expensive everywhere, because it's got a lot of lead in it. Or you buy a floating rope, but you will have to lead it. Do not use floating rope. Always sink your rope. I mean, use it, but always sink it. Now the way I do that, I'll show you quickly on this, is you're going to need some lead sheet. This is lead sheet that's been cut. This one's been used. These are some little ones from a little 8mm job. So you basically cut a strip off like that. You get your rope like that, and you open it, and you just put one end. Hopefully you can see all this. One end into the rope like so. Then you basically just wind it round like that, and you do it nice and tight, nice and neat, and you finish off just tighten up with a pair of pliers at the end. So you basically wrap up the rope. Then what you do is, once you've wrapped up the rope, you could leave it like that, but here, when the pot goes through rocks or the tide and gets dragged around, it could pull the start undoing it. So what I do is I get a roll of insulation tape. Now this is kind of a nice stretchy one, not that horrible plastic stuff you can get which doesn't stretch and just breaks all the time. This has a bit of stretch in it. Then what you do is, as you see on here, you bind it over the top. So basically you take that over the lead like that, and you just basically wind it round, go all the way down like that, and then once you get to the end, come all the way back again like that. I'm not going to go all the way because I've already done it. Do that, and there it is. Now this stuff, you think, oh well, that'll just come off in the water. It doesn't. What happens is, when this goes in the water, this electrical tape, it gets cold and it gets hard, and eventually it's like a plastic coating which goes rock hard over your lead. You might get the odd piece that starts to undo. It does happen, but generally if you just snap it off out in the sea, take that bit that's coming off and press it down again, it will seal itself down, and eventually, like I say, they go rock hard, and these will last. I mean, I go over them each year. I just check any bad ones, but generally they'll last a couple of years, 2 or 3 years like that, and that'll sink your rope. Now again, depending on the rope you're using and the depth of water you're in, you want to be doing this deep water probably every 12 feet, shallow water every 6 feet, but that is very dependent on where you're fishing and how deep your water is. You never want the rope, because you've got to remember, if you've got 2 leads, like say you had a lead here and a lead here, then it's obviously half the distance. If your rope was tight together, that would come to the surface. It never is, because you tighten your ropes up. But if it was, you've got to think of that height from the 2 leads. Will that hit the surface? Will that catch a boat? Will that cause a problem for anybody? So like I say, I normally go 6 and 12 feet when I use deeper pots, and that's how you can lead your own rope. You do it like that, and then that'll sink. Now when you first put it in the water, it's going to be very buoyant. You might have to add a few extra lead bits to start with to sink the rope. Not always. If you've leaded enough, you'll be fine. If you haven't leaded enough, then you might get that. Once this rope has soaked up the water, it'll sink quite easily, and eventually you'll get sand and grit in it as well, and it all helps to keep this rope sunk. But when you first throw it in the water, it might be a bit buoyant, so just be aware of that when you first lay your pot. You know, just watch it when you throw it in, just see that it goes down before you leave. If you've got any areas that might stay up, just add a bit more lead, sink it, and the next time you come out, take that off, throw it in, you'll see that it will just sink. Like I say, especially when the ropes are very new, it's full of air. Once all that's gone and it gets old, they'll sink much easier. Now, bobbers, or buoys. We call them bobbers here. Most of you probably know them as buoys. There you go, buoy. Now, what you've got to remember with these things is, I always put two on. Put one here, one there. We have a lot of tide. This first one always gets pulled under the water. The second one, most of the time it stays up. But with our tides, it doesn't matter. But these things will always go under on a really big, strong tide. They will get pulled under. If you're close in, they tend to stay up. But once you get a bit further out, they get pulled under. Now you think, well, I'll stick bigger buoys on. Not a good idea when you've only got a couple of pots. You will drag your pots away. The other problem you have is, I don't know if you can see up there, the great big ones. Those huge, great ones. These things up here, I mean, those are massive, and even when you go out far, that's what the commercials will use on their big lines. And even those, with two of those on, they're gone. Massive tides, you see them just disappear. You know, when I'm out there fishing, I use them sometimes as markers so I know where I am when I'm fishing. And quite often when the tide starts ripping hard, they're gone, they disappear. So saying, oh, your bobber's got to stay up, it won't happen, not around here. Obviously, different areas, different rules, you know. Some places you will be able to keep your bobbers up, and you should keep your bobbers up because, you know, boats have got to see them. But like I say here, it's just one of those things, the tides are too strong. Everything will get pulled down eventually. So, like I say, I use two. I use a smaller one at the front, maybe a bit bigger than that. Sometimes I use two of these, or one of this. It depends where I'm putting the pots. As you can see, I've got these. These are probably going to go on. I'm going to use probably two of those per pot. Well, you can see this one's a bit bigger, this one's a bit smaller, so two of those is fine. And I know that won't cause my pots to get dragged, and if they do get pulled under, my pots can handle that. The other thing that I've said, which I mentioned before, is your rope. If your rope's thinner, it'll cut the tide, your bobbers will stay up easier, you won't need as big a bobber to stay on the surface. Pick yourself a nice big bright bobber, so that it can be seen. Importantly, do not lay your pots in fairways, or where boats use passages. Obviously, if you know the area, you know the fishermen and where people lay, and they know you, you'll know where you can and can't between rocks. You know, where it upsets people, like if it's too dangerous, you know, if somebody's going to run into it, that sort of thing. But definitely, anywhere there's harbours or anything like that, where there's passages coming in, keep your pots out of that. Otherwise, they'll be out there and they'll take your pots away. And if you get your pots wrapped up in a boat, they might even fine you, charge you the cost of repairing the boat for wrapping pots up. On top of that, some boats have cutters on. Not a big fan of them because some people get complacent with them and just run over lines that don't care about lines that are in their way, and they end up slicing off your bobbers and you lose all your pots, which has a double effect. Now you've got ghost fishing pots because some idiot ran your lines. But that's not always the case. They were put on a lot of boats to prevent the boat fouling and getting itself in serious trouble, but like I say, these days they could be on some boats who just don't care. So anyway, make sure you get a couple of bobbers on there. Now the other thing is, you've got to mark your bobbers. Now these rules vary depending on where you are and who you are. If you have a license, like me, you have to put on your license, or your boat number. Basically mine is GU115. Over here it'll be GU117, 118, 1110 or 2350, whatever, it'll be there. Hopefully you've got a short one, you don't need to write so many numbers on. Other places they require you to put if your boat's registered, as in just your boat, there should be a registration number. Other places they want you to put your name, phone number. In other parts of the world they want you to put everything on your bobber, or commercial, non-commercial, and they want you to put on tags on your pots, all those sort of things, but you'll have to check for your area. For me, it's basically my boat, my license number for my boat, which is that there. Now some other tips with things like bobbers and that. I buy these ones most of the time if I can now. They have a ferrule inside the ring of the bobber. This one you buy doesn't. but I don't like them when they don't. So what I do is I get a bit of alkathene pipe and I push it in there and I just melt the edge over so it can't come out. It's just to save this from rubbing on the bobber and ripping it, because these things will, if they rub, if they get torn a little bit, they will rip in strong tides or storms, and you end up ripping your bobbers off. So that's to stop the bobbers getting damaged. They're perfectly fine without them in most places, but it just extends the life of the bobber and saves you having bobbers ripped off. The other thing I do is, whenever I put a bobber on like this on rope, I'll use some of that tape on the rope. Yeah, I'll just wrap some around that rope when it goes through there, just to stop this plastic from rubbing away on there. Again, if it wears into your rope, then you'll go out and check your pots and your bobbers are gone and your pots are sunk because you've lost it. So far I haven't lost, as far as I know, pots from bobbers wearing on the ropes. Not as yet. Now another thing is, if you do more than one pot on a line, you're going to want one of these. It's called a pot spinner, and basically it goes on the rope. I'll show you afterwards when we do a pot. You basically stick it on the rope and it can basically do that, and then you tie another rope through there with a knot and it can go that way. So basically it stops your pots from twisting around, untwisting the fibres in your ropes, and basically just getting tangled up in a right old mess. It's just like a fishing swivel but on a rope for a crab pot. So, but that's only, like I say, if you're doing more than one pot on a line. Right, let's have a look at some pots. We'll start with this one here. This is an Inkwell. It's the old traditional style of pot. I'll show you this one down here, because this is the same thing, it's just a slightly smaller one. Now these originally were built many years ago. They were originally built in wicker. They were probably around because it was easy to just wicker a pot in a circle. On top of that, when a crab comes up this, it'll find its way in very quickly straight into the top. It won't walk around a pot like, say, one of these. So a good pot for that. You don't see them as much these days. I think that's probably because there's a lot less crab around, because these are brilliant for brown crab and for spider crab, but they're not as great for lobster. You will get lobsters in them. In fact, you can buy these little trap things that go in the top as well, but in general, like I say, these are much better for shanker, not very good, as far as I'm concerned, for lobster, because a lobster swims, obviously it can find its way out fairly easy. Although if you're doing your pots every day, you probably catch perfectly fine in them. But those, like I say, were based on the original design. I don't use them as pots anymore, because in a small boat, when they come up, they twist like this. They're a right pig to pull out of the boat or onto the boat, whereas the D pots tend to stay in a better way, like this one. Now this one is actually a parlour. This one is, it's a D pot, but it's got a trap in it there, a net trap which closes up. So basically the lobster goes in here, walks through there, well that's the theory anyway, walks through there and ends up in there, and that just closes down, so it makes it more awkward for the lobster to get out. The one thing I would say about these, I either have a door, or I have on the end here a piece of string where the net has been cut. If the pot gets lost, that string will rot, the pot will open, the catch can escape, and every year you just change the string. This pot's obviously a bit beaten up. All of these pots are here because they're going to be repaired or taken apart and recycle the plastic and that, and then I'm going to make some more. And obviously that's the one I use there. They'll catch everything, and like I say, very good for lobster. And this is just the basic D, which doesn't have any trap in it, and they just basically go straight into there. This catches everything as well. This will catch just as well as this, although if this pot gets trapped out there for a week and a half, 2 weeks in storms, this one's more likely to hold its catch than this one, because obviously if this is open, they got more chance to find their way out over time. Plus if it tips up, then they can just swim straight out of it, that sort of thing. But if you're checking your pots very regularly, this is a really good pot, and it's very quick, easy and fairly cheap to build as well, if you ever want to build these pots. And this is just a box pot. This is normally the original ones of these, they were sort of big in the 50s, 60s, 70s, because we had a lot of greenhouses on the island, so there was a lot of excess greenhouse wood from old greenhouses, and basically they used to take the greenhouse timbers, the bars that actually used to hold all the glass in, and build them into a square box, stick a neck in the middle, and they were great for catching spider crabs. They catch lobsters, they catch everything basically, and apparently they were pretty damn good for catching crawfish. Now there is one other pot which I don't have here, because pure and simply I just don't use them, and to be honest I won't use them, even though it's a very popular pot and they use them a lot up in Scotland, places like that, or a lot of places use them, and they're called a creel. And they basically have a net trap, or a couple of net traps, in the side, in the end, wherever, but usually in the sides they'll have one here and one over there, like the net on this parlour pot we talked about, and it just basically, they go in and the net just closes up behind them. And they use it in a lot of places. I've had 3 in the past. I had one I built, and I had 2 different types that were like shop, commercial ones, and I caught very, very little in them. I think what it is probably where I am with all the tides and that. I used to find sometimes when we had a swell, a bit of roll, that seaweed would go into those net entrances and just jam up the entrances. And it's possible that was it. But although I spoke to a commercial fisherman who used to sell creels, and he told me that if the traps aren't perfect on a creel, they won't catch well at all. He said he's had like a couple of 100 pots out, different types of creel, and he reckons one set was amazing and the other set was terrible. So it could be down to that, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a creel expert. Somebody might be able to tell you out there who builds creels why that is or why that isn't. But here, like I say, I think a lot of it's to do with seaweed getting pushed into those traps, being on the side and that, whereas here, if seaweed goes in, it clears, but those traps might trap it. The other side of the reason I don't use them is because I obviously fish for big crabs, big spider crabs, and anything else I can catch, crawfish. And with a smaller entrance with those traps, I'm not going to get those great big things going in, which is fine if you're only targeting lobster. It'll keep those sort of things out as well. You just get the smaller crabs going in. Right, I'm going to show you the way I rope up the pots. Some people will do it differently. Some people may splice into the rope and put their spinners on different ways, that sort of thing. So what you basically got is you've got your first rope. Length is going to depend on where you fish. That's something you'll have to work out for yourself. But basically, length of rope goes to your first pot, which gets thrown over. It then comes up to this. Now, all I do is, this is a pot spinner. You can buy them at the fishing stores or the where they do pot supplies. And I basically have a couple of ropes. This is a really old one. This is going to probably be decommissioned, this rope. I tie a couple of knots in there. I put that on there, and that just stops it going anywhere, but it allows it to do that. So if your pots ever move in storms and things, they're not going to get tangled. Then you would get, say, this pot here, which is on another rope, but you tie a short piece of rope. I mean, the way I do it is top to bottom. I might have just shown you that, or that'll be coming up. I then put that through there, then literally tie a couple of blood knots or whatever in it, and you can even use a zip tie if you want just to lock the knot. You can just put it through the knot and lock them down so it can never undo, or a bit of tape on the tags, whichever you prefer. But basically put it through there and knot it, and that's that done. So you've got a pot there, and if you want another pot, you just keep feeding the rope out to the next pot, or the next rope goes to the surface. So basically it's like that. And then, like I say, you just put that through the hole, tie a knot, and this way the pot can twist. So if the pot starts rolling, it won't tangle up, and it can turn that way around the rope so it doesn't twist around the rope as well. Now, if your pots ever do move and you've just got them tied, you're going to find these ropes can twist so much they can actually undo. All the strands can actually get undone. I've seen it before where it's spun around and literally taken the whole lot. It has happened with a pot where the spinner got locked, it got sort of jammed like that, and they literally just undid all this for about 2 feet. So yeah, that's why you put these on, is to prevent that from happening if your pots ever spin or twist in the water or get moved in storms. And then, like I say, this main rope just goes off to the bobbers, and how you tie your bobbers on depends on the bobber, of course, but distance between bobbers, I normally go, well, I've got like about, I think I've got about 12 feet out in the deeps, but you can keep it to sort of 3 feet or something in the shallows. It depends where you're potting. Again, just tied on to one end, and then down to another bobber, and that one just goes through like that with a couple of knots. And sometimes I just keep these lines separate like that, so I can just take them off and change these out, the bobbers out anytime. just make sure, well, in most places if you've got tide, you really want to have a couple of bobbers on, because if you've only got one on, it will get pulled under the water. This one will sort of go under, usually this one will stay up. So depending again, like I say, on your tide. If you've got no tide, then you might be right with one, just maybe put a bigger one on. And again, think about the size of bobbers you're putting on for your pots. If you put too big of bobbers on, you get big swells, big movement in tide. Your pots are going to get dragged away, and what happens is they tend not to move necessarily straight away, but they'll jolt, and if you can't get to your pots for a week, they'll move 100 meters one day, another 100 meters, another 100, and before you know it, they're miles or headed out into the deeps and you've lost them. So yeah, put big enough bobbers that boats can see, but don't go overkill that they drag your pots away. Like I say, it's all dependent on your pots and where you put them. Again, those are all the things you have to learn in your area where you pot. Now in a lot of crab pots, you'll see that ropes are often tied from left to right across the pot like this. Whenever I do my pots, I always go top to bottom like that, and here's why. Right, so as you can see, this is the one that's side to side. There's no weights in this, so I made it easy for myself. This is a new pot, and when you pull this one up, it can do that, so you have to literally do that and then up, which makes your life very difficult. Whereas this one, you literally grab the rope there and you can adjust where you slide your hand on that rope. And if you go down lower, it'll just literally kick up like that, straight out. Nice and easy. Like I said, this is perfect for when you're pulling them by hand. The other way is designed more for when you're pulling them up on winches. And one more thing, what pot you choose to use is entirely up to you. Like I say, pots will vary in different areas, different parts of the country or the world, wherever you use the pots. It depends if you're on sand, rocks, gravel, you know, there's all different sort of areas. On top of that, it's going to vary depending on what bait you're using, how often you check it, and all these sort of things. So the best thing is just get out there, get a few pots in the water, and find out what works for you.